Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get right into it then with our first plenary, Creating a Motorsport Culture. We'll be exploring how a motorsport culture can be created, particularly in a brand new market. Now, we've seen obviously a number of new markets emerge over the course of the last few years, namely China, Azerbaijan. Lately, Vietnam, namely Hanoi, had a Formula One demonstration. And obviously here in the Philippines, we heard that we could have a Formula One or FIA World Championship event in due time. So this plenary will explore the steps that can be taken to educate new audiences to increase interest and, by extension, attendances at events, as well as, of course, the potential pitfalls.
So to help us to set the scene, I'm delighted to welcome Formula One driver and now commentator on Fox Sports Asia, Alex Young, who'll give us an overview of motorsport in the Asia-Pacific region. Alex Young, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Paula. Thank you very much for having me here, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here. And of course, thank you, FIA, for choosing Manila to be its first Asian location for your annual conference. Now, I know a lot of you have come from all around the world, so I'm here to give you a brief overview of Asian motorsports. And my name is Alex Young. I do a lot of work with Fox Sports, with Paula Malayali, and that's where most of you know me from. Let's see if we can... That's me. What it doesn't say up there is that I grew up in Malaysia. I was born and raised in Malaysia, and I grew up amongst the oil palm estates and rubber tree estates following the rallying. My father ran the Malaysian Rally Championship, also helped with the Asia Pacific Rally Championship. So I grew up watching people like Lassie Lampe, Ross Dunkerton, Rod Millen, and of course the late Possum Bourne coming down to our shores. I have a lot of very good memories at 3 o'clock in the morning waiting for the headlights to illuminate the trees as they came up into the, onto the track, or onto the roads. And of course then my father ran the Batatiga track in Shah Alam, so I also was involved as a kid running underfoot with motorsports throughout Malaysia's growth in the 80s and 90s. So, just a little bit of a timeline, historical timeline. You can see that actually, when I was doing this research, I was quite surprised. I thought, okay, I have 10 minutes to talk about Asian motorsports. I'm not really sure how much history there is, but as I found out, there's actually quite a bit of history. So I'm going to have to try and talk a bit fast to get it all in the 10 minutes that I have. 1907, we had the first automobile club established, and hill climb was held that year in Perak. And in those early years, most of them were hill climbs. First Grand Prix in Johor was held in 1940, pre-war, and that was pretty special. And you can see some other notable points there. First Macau Grand Prix in 1954. I'm sure you've all heard of the Macau Grand Prix. It's the biggest race here in Asia, and it's always looked forward to every year. And in 1967, the Batatiga track in Shah Alam was built. That was the first purpose-built racetrack built in Asia, as far as I know, outside of Japan, of course. And that's the track I grew up amongst. I spent all my childhood through there. Earliest memories were there. As a 3-year-old, watching cars race around Rothman's Corner. It's pretty special indeed. Of course, Green Hills Grand Prix in Philippines, here locally. First MotoGP happened in Shah Alam in Malaysia in 1991. I was fortunate to be there as well. I ran the electronic boards for that race as I watched John Kocinski win the first Grand Prix in Malaysia. Of course, it's called it 500cc bikes back then. And then we had the first race in China, in Zhuhai, in 1994. It was a GT street race. I was happy to be there as well. I raced in a single-seater championship called Formula Asia. And it was really interesting. We saw more bicycles than cars on the streets back then, and I do remember walking past a few cafes with dogs barking in the back. I'll leave that up to your imagination of what's going on back then. And of course, the first Formula One race in 1998 in Malaysia. Big deal in Malaysia, and it really brought the Formula One to the forefront of everyone's mind in the country where I was born. Have some visuals here for you. 1940 Johor Grand Prix. I wish I could tell you more details about the drivers and the cars, but it's way before my time, I'm afraid. 1960 Macau Grand Prix. That is a Jaguar XKSS with a Ferrari Monza, I think, on the right. So pretty special. And if you look there, actually, this is not the start straight that you see in Macau today. This is actually on the lead up to Mandarin as the first corner. And you can see the seaside, the sea is just over that wall in the background. A lot of reclaimed land, casinos there now. It's changed completely. It's a picture of, this is Eddie Marcello, local driver in 1971, looking very cavalier and relaxed next to his car. See if I can get the next one going. Here we go. So this is Batutika, it's my home track. I think that was a Rolt RT1 on pole there. It's a little bit far away for you to see. But just take a note of the crowds. You know, this is a purpose-built track, first one built. And they were packed, you know, the 70s and 80s, and all the way through the 90s. Even the smallest race, we'd get about 30,000 people coming to our events. So motorsport is not brand new here. There is a history. There is actually a history of spectators as well. I remember doing Formula Asia races at the local tracks, and it was very much a national race, but it was always packed. And they would stay. The racing would finish, and it would then lead to night racing and drag strip racing down the start-finish straight. Really, really great environment to be part of. Of course, I was born in 1976 or so that was a pretty good year for me. I love this picture. 1983 Penang Grand Prix. I was there. That's Hans Stuck in an M1 getting sideways. 81, let's say I was 5. So my father, I think, was racing a Mazda RX-5 in that race. And I can remember there's a picture of me. There was no pit wall back then. There were no pit lanes back then. There was just a curb down the start-finish straight. And there's a picture of me next to the pit board, the signaling board. And it's as tall as I am. And I'm trying to lean out 1 foot on the actual track with the signaling board as my dad races by, literally meters away. Thankfully, due to the efforts of the FIA, it's a lot safer now. I'm not sure we would allow 5-year-olds on the pit wall nowadays. But good memories. I remember Hans Stuck was in a lot of epic battles with the Rothmans RX-7s, driven by our local racers. So we had some really good international races and teams coming down and racing against our local racers. And as you can see, they were very well attended. So basically, I'm talking about motorsports today. And what exactly do I mean? You may have noticed I've not really included Japan. That's because as an Asian growing up here, Japan wasn't never really seen as part of Asia. It had a fully mature motorsport scene up and running. It was way too expensive for us to travel and go to. It was almost as out of reach as Europe. And in our local races in Malaysia and Indonesia and Thailand, we would see slightly more influence from the Japanese manufacturers coming down, but not much. It was they're pretty much as untouchable as Europe was back then. So, and like I said, you know, they have manufacturers in the bike and the car industry, and they're fully developed. So I'm going to, for the purposes of today, talk about Asian motorsport, mostly from an East Asian angle, specifically in Southeast Asia, because that's where I feel we need to concentrate our attentions a lot more in growing the sport for this region. So we have not many tracks here. That's one of the problems that we need. We need more facilities. You know, in Thailand, we have two permanent tracks. One is a grade A and one is a grade 3. And of course, there's one big street race in Bangsian. That race is growing. That's 100,000 people turning up for that race every year. It's a very big street race. They consider it the mini Macau. And a lot of drivers and teams look forward to that race now, and it's getting bigger and bigger. But Thailand's the only real success story lately. I think in Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, correct me if I'm wrong, Indonesia, there just hasn't been that much growth since the 90s. There's a bit of stagnation there. There's a lot more awareness of Formula One, WEC, of course Formula E is doing great things to give us an awareness of motorsport. But we're not seeing much development on the grassroots side. And as you can imagine, it is a little bit out of reach for most people to take part in motorsport. But hopefully through conferences like today, we will be able to help come up with solutions to try and fix that. I do understand there was just recently, yesterday, a conference on this. So I'm looking forward to seeing about and listening about ideas and solutions. I put a question mark on Vietnam because, like you said, there was an F1 demo there, which is great news. Vietnam is growing at an extremely fast rate, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple permanent tracks there within a couple of years. What about the rest of Asia, obviously? Macau, that's a one-off event. The Zhuhai International Track is just next door, so you do see some local races throughout the years next door to Macau. But Macau is a big deal in Asian motorsport. You know, growing up, as long as I can remember, everyone, even Japan, would center their motorsport activities around Macau. Coming to Macau, racing Macau. It was the biggest event by far. Sponsors you could find to go racing would only come on board if you were doing Macau. If you weren't doing Macau, you just couldn't get sponsors. So it was all centered around Macau. It's the biggest by far. It's the only street race in the world where bikes and cars race on the same weekend. And of course, you have international and local races running together. That's very important because the exposure you get from Macau, like I mentioned, helps fund local races. We are seeing a slight move away from that now. Macau has grown so big, and there's so many great international events in there, and it's fantastic. It brings up the level very high. But it is hard for local teams and drivers to get onto the track. The local races are not getting the same exposure. And of course, the level of the local races are not as high as on the international scene. So sometimes you do see accidents. And so there needs to be a balance there, I feel, in the coming years, because I think for Macau it's very important we keep that right dynamic of local racing and international racing, because it means so much to Asian motorsport. Now, of course, there's some others which I'm not really going to touch on today. Korea, you know, you have manufacturers like Hyundai, got a great Grade 1 track there and some other Grade 2 tracks. That's growing at a nice rate, and I think we're going to hear a lot more from Korea in the next few years. In India, we have the Bud International Track, fantastic facility, but perhaps a little bit premature for that. I think there's just a lot of club racing going on there. And of course, there's a track in Madras, in Chennai. And in the Middle East, we have a track in Qatar, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Bahrain. And yeah, but like I said, I'm going to focus on East Asia today, more specifically Southeast Asia, and of course, China. Now, China is the monster. In the last 10 years, I've seen it just explode. You know, it's the largest automotive segment in the world. You know, that's 23 million cars sold per year. You know, it's phenomenal how fast it's grown. I was just reading an article yesterday that apparently there's a billionaire that appears on the scene in China every 5 days. And while motorsports is out of the cost, it's out of reach for most of the population, even that 1% in China is a huge number, and it's growing very fast. You know, we have 12 tracks there now, and there are another five tracks when I went through it, being built or being planned at the moment for this year as well. The karting is up and running. F4 is up and running. F3 Asia is starting this year. It's very interesting indeed, and I have to applaud FIA for streamlining Formula 4 and Formula 3 and make it a lot more simpler for drivers to get into the sport. Of course, rallying and rallycross is also developing as well. It's rallying and rallycross have kind of been the forgotten brothers in Asia at the moment, but I'm glad to see it's still running in China, and hopefully we'll see it get better again, grow perhaps in Philippines again, and maybe Malaysia in the future. But first, we have to get more kids into the program. Mr. Todd talked about it, that has to be a priority. More kids into karting, they will branch out and do other forms of racing. It's not all just about going to Formula 1. There are other avenues to go to nowadays. But of course, the main thing about motorsports is GT racing. 3 years ago, we only had one GT championship. And now, as you can see, there are 6, and GT Asia is also not there, 7. So there are a lot of championships growing. And this is that 1% of 1% in China. Don't forget, there are a lot of first-generation car users still in China, or second generation. Motorsports is exciting to them. It's like Europe in the 70s. It is exploding. China will be absolutely fine. You don't have to touch it. It will grow and have a fully fledged motorsport scene in the years to come. And to be honest, it is helping us in Southeast Asia. There has been a lot of trickle-down effect because of their growth in China that's helping us, because we see championships going to China, using that as the base, but coming to Malaysia and hopefully Philippines in the future, Taiwan, Thailand. You know, Thailand is also a success story in the region. So this is very important for us. So the challenges. This is the tricky thing. What do we do to help get more kids into karting? What do we do to get more tracks up and running? And that's why I'm so excited about being here today, to meet all of you and my Asian colleagues as well, so we can throw around ideas to see how we can help. Firstly, you know, we need more local series and local heroes to be cultivated. That's how we grow the stories. There's a lot of awareness in the general public about stuff like Formula One and Formula E and WEC, but it's not leaving any room for the local growth of local motorsports. We need to try and have some engagement. There needs to be some more of a connection there, because if we don't get more people growing in this region, more karters and more teams and especially more organizers, we need more organizers to be helped in growing our local championships, we would just end up as a second Europe. Because we see it already with the Blancpain Asia coming here. They're raising the level to a very high level, but they're also bringing European teams and European drivers because the budgets are cheaper here. We need to make sure we have local drivers and local teams, and we're not going to get them unless we can get more of these numbers into it. Formula 4, Formula 3, fantastic programs, but still out of reach of pretty much the entire population of Asians, especially in Southeast Asia. We need to find a way, maybe build the cars here or something, to make the cars more affordable for us to get into motorsports. And is there a way, without of course sacrificing safety, because we make great strides in safety, we cannot afford to go back on that, but is there a way to make it cheaper for circuits to get certified? Now, I just heard that Clark here is a grade 4 track, which surprised me, because I thought it was a grade 2 track. You know, I've seen tracks in Europe in poorer condition achieve grade 2 certification. So is there a way to get better certification for the tracks that just need a little bit of help along the way to get that? Because then we can have more local events, more international events come to these races to be held with local events. We need to get airtime and exposure for our local events so their sponsors can be serviced. And like I said, I don't have the answers for this, but these are the challenges that is being posed for the region. And hopefully, all of us today, for these next few days, we can work together to try and find some solutions and some ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alex Jung.
Thank you.